You may think your tomatoes need more fertilizer or more water, but in many cases, that is exactly why your harvest never becomes what you hoped for. I made that same mistake for years, and every season I watched plants grow taller, while the tomatoes stayed small, cracked, or slow to ripen. It is frustrating to spend months caring for a garden, only to fill your basket with fruit that never reaches its full size. The truth is that most people are trying to fix the wrong problem from the very beginning. If you stay with me today, I will show you the simple natural methods that completely change the way I grow tomatoes, and they do not require expensive products or complicated tricks. I am not talking as a scientist or someone trying to sell you something. I am simply sharing what many years in the garden have taught me and what an older neighbor quietly showed me long ago. That advice has saved me money every single season, and it has given me healthier plants with heavier harvests than I ever thought possible. One thing I noticed is that healthy tomatoes do not begin when the first flowers appear. They begin before the plant even touches the ground. Most gardeners become excited when planting day arrives and they rush through the job because they cannot wait to see tomatoes growing. I understand that feeling because I have done exactly the same. But rushing is often the first mistake that follows you for the rest of the season. The soil may look fine from the top, but underneath it can be too hard, too dry, or too poor to support strong roots. Weak roots always lead to weak plants no matter how much fertilizer you add later. That is why I now spend more time preparing the soil than planting the tomato itself. Many people skip this step because it does not look exciting, but this old habit has given me some of the largest tomatoes I've ever grown. Everything becomes easier after that because the plant starts with confidence instead of struggling to survive. In the next part, I want to show you exactly how I prepare the ground, using simple natural materials that most people already have at home, and why one small step before planting makes a bigger difference than almost anything you can do later in the season. Dot. The first thing I do after choosing the planting spot is forget about expensive bags of fertilizer for a moment, because healthy tomatoes need living soil before they need feeding. This is where most people lose a big part of their future harvest without even realizing it. They dig a hole, place the plant inside, cover it with soil, and hope that feeding later will solve every problem. It usually does not work that way. Strong tomatoes begin with strong roots, and roots only become strong when the soil is loose, rich, and able to hold moisture without becoming heavy. Many years ago, an older gardener told me something that stayed with me ever since. He said, never feed the plant before you feed the soil. At first, I did not understand what he meant, but after trying his method, I never went back. I start by loosening the soil deeper than most people expect, because tomato roots like to spread and search for food instead of fighting hard ground. Then I mix in well-aged compost because it slowly feeds the soil for weeks instead of giving the plant one quick burst of growth. If I have a little wood ash from clean, untreated firewood, I add only a small handful because it brings valuable minerals that tomatoes appreciate when used carefully. If I have crushed eggshells saved from the kitchen, I mix those into the soil too. Many people throw them away, but they become one more simple ingredient that costs nothing and helps build healthier soil over time. I never expect one ingredient to perform miracles because gardening has never worked that way for me. Instead, I let several simple natural materials work together, and the difference becomes clear as the season moves forward. Another mistake I see very often is planting tomatoes into dry soil and watering only after everything is finished. I prefer to water the planting hole first so the moisture is already waiting for the roots instead of forcing the young plant to search for it after transplanting. This simple habit reduces stress and helps the tomato settle much faster. Very few people pay attention to these quiet details because they are not exciting, but these are exactly the steps that give me healthier plants year after year. The surprising part is that I still have not reached the most important step, because what happens during planting itself determines whether those roots become powerful enough to support large, heavy clusters of tomatoes later in the season. When the soil is ready, I never rush to place the tomato into the ground, because this is another moment where many gardeners quietly lose part of their harvest. I have watched people plant tomatoes exactly the same way they plant almost everything else, and then wonder why the plants struggle during the hottest weeks of summer. Tomatoes reward patience more than speed. Before planting, I always soak the root ball for a short time, if it feels dry, because a well-hydrated plant settles much faster after transplanting. Then I remove any damaged lower leaves and look carefully at the stem. Few people do this, but it makes a real difference later. Tomatoes are special because the stem can grow new roots wherever it is covered with soil. That means I plant mine deeper than most people expect. I bury part of the stem instead of leaving it all above the ground. Over the next weeks, that hidden section develops extra roots and the entire plant becomes stronger without any expensive treatment. An older gardener showed me this many years ago, and at first I thought he was making extra work for himself. Then I saw his tomatoes standing tall after heavy rain, while many others were already bending under the weight of the fruit. That lesson stayed with me. After placing the plant into the hole, I gently pressed the soil around it without packing it too hard because roots still need air as much as they need water. Then I water slowly instead of pouring everything at once. Slow watering allows the moisture to move deeper into the soil where the roots will soon follow. This is also the moment when I add a simple layer of natural mulch around the plant, but I keep it a small distance away from the stem. Dry grass straw or shredded leaves all work well because they help keep the soil cool and reduce the number of times I need to water during hot weather. That means less work and healthier plants at the same time. Most people think larger tomatoes come from feeding more often, but I have learned that keeping the soil evenly moist is often much more important than adding another fertilizer. A tomato that constantly struggles with dry and wet cycles never performs at its best. There is one more old habit that almost nobody around me uses anymore, and it helps the plants produce stronger flowers and heavier fruit clusters throughout the season. That is exactly what I want to show you next. Now we come to the part that many people expect to be complicated, but it is actually one of the simplest habits I have ever learned. It is not about buying another bottle or following a strict schedule. It is about feeding the tomato at the right time instead of feeding it all the time. I used to believe that more fertilizer meant more tomatoes. My plants became tall with dark green leaves, but the harvest never matched the size of the plants. Then an older friend smiled and said that I was feeding leaves instead of fruit. That simple sentence changed the way I garden forever. Since then, I wait until the plants have settled well and started growing before I give them their first natural feeding. My favorite choice is homemade compost tea because it is gentle and it feeds both the soil and the plant without forcing fast wheat growth. If I do not have compost tea, I use a light organic liquid fertilizer instead of anything too strong. I would rather feed a little several times than give one heavy feeding that pushes the plant too hard. Very few people have the patience for this, but I have seen the results year after year. The plants stay balanced and healthy and they keep producing, instead of slowing down after one heavy burst of growth. When the first flowers begin to appear, I pay even closer attention because this is another place where many gardeners make a costly mistake. They continue using the same high nitrogen fertilizer they started with and wonder why flowers fall before becoming tomatoes. At this stage, I shift my attention toward natural feeds that support flowering and fruit development instead of leaf growth. Sometimes I add a little wood ash if my soil needs it, and I always use it carefully because a small amount goes a long way. Another habit I never skip is checking the plants every morning for just a few minutes. I look at the leaves, the flowers, and the soil before the heat of the day arrives. Most problems are much easier to solve when they are still small. That quiet morning walk through the garden often tells me everything I need to know without any special tools. There is one more forgotten habit that has probably saved more tomatoes in my garden than any fertilizer ever could. And surprisingly, it has almost nothing to do with feeding at all. For a long time, I believed that watering tomatoes simply meant giving them enough water whenever the soil looked dry. It sounded logical, but the results kept disappointing me. Some tomatoes cracked just before I picked them. Others stayed smaller than they should have been, and every now and then I would lose fruit because of problems that I thought were diseases. It took me years to understand that tomatoes do not only need water, they need consistency. That is one lesson many gardeners never hear. I stopped watering a little every day because it encouraged shallow roots that suffered as soon as the weather became hot. Instead, I began watering slowly and deeply, so the moisture reached farther into the ground. The roots followed that moisture and became much stronger. After that, I covered the soil with a thicker layer of natural mulch, using straw-dried grass or shredded leaves depending on what I had available. That simple layer saved water, reduced weeds, and kept the soil temperature much more stable during hot summer days. It also meant I spent less time carrying watering cans and more time simply enjoying the garden. Very few people realize how much energy a tomato plant wastes when the soil keeps changing from very dry to very wet. Those sudden changes often lead to cracked fruit and uneven growth, even if the plant looks healthy from a distance. Another old habit I still follow is watering early in the morning whenever possible. The plant has the whole day to use that moisture, and the leaves stay dry, which helps avoid many common problems. I never rush to splash water over the entire plant because wet leaves are rarely helpful. I always aim the water toward the soil where the roots actually need it. While I'm watering, I also take a slow look at every plant. If I notice a yellow leaf near the bottom, I remove it. If I see a damaged stem, I deal with it before it becomes a bigger problem. These tiny jobs only take a few minutes, but they save hours of trouble later in the season. Most people wait until they see obvious damage before taking action, but by then, the plant has already spent valuable energy trying to recover. There is one final natural habit that ties everything together and helps tomatoes continue producing long after many gardens begin slowing down. It is simple, almost free, and it is something I never skip once the first heavy clusters of fruit begin to grow. By the middle of the season, most gardeners believe the hard work is finished, but I have learned that this is exactly when the best harvest is either protected or quietly lost. A healthy tomato plant can carry a surprising amount of fruit, but only if you continue giving it simple care instead of forgetting about it once the first tomatoes appear. One habit I never skip is supporting heavy branches before they begin to bend under the weight. Many people wait until a branch is already cracked and then try to fix it, but by then the plant has already lost valuable strength. I gently tie the stems to strong stakes or cages using soft material that does not cut into the plant. It only takes a few minutes and it saves countless tomatoes later. Another old method I still follow is removing only the leaves that no longer help the plant. I never strip the plant bare because the leaves are still producing energy for the fruit. Instead, I slowly remove older leaves near the bottom that receive little light or touch the soil. This improves air movement around the plant and keeps everything cleaner without causing unnecessary stress. Very few people find the right balance here because they either remove almost nothing or far too much. I also continue feeding lightly every couple of weeks with natural compost tea or another gentle organic feed. I never try to force the plant with heavy fertilizer because large, healthy tomatoes come from steady growth, not sudden growth. Something else I have noticed over the years is that the best tomatoes often come from plants that never experience major stress. They are not the fastest growing plants, but they are the most consistent. Every morning I spend just a few quiet minutes walking through the garden. I touch the soil with my hand instead of guessing whether it needs water. I look under the leaves instead of only looking from above. I check the fruit before problems become visible from across the garden. Those few minutes often prevent hours of work later. Gardening has taught me that small habits repeated many times are much more powerful than one big effort after something goes wrong. The wonderful part is that none of these habits cost much money. Most of them cost nothing at all. They simply require paying attention to the plants a little each day. There is one final lesson I want to leave with you because it completely changed the way I think about growing tomatoes. And it is probably the biggest reason my harvest became larger, healthier, and far more dependable year after year. When I look back at all the years I have spent growing tomatoes, I realize that the biggest changes never came from expensive products or complicated techniques. They came from slowing down and paying attention to the simple things that many people overlook. Healthy soil, careful planting, steady watering, gentle feeding, and a few quiet minutes in the garden each day have given me better harvests than any shortcut ever has. That is why I no longer chase every new product that promises giant tomatoes overnight. I trust the methods that have worked season after season because they have earned that trust. If you begin with healthy soil, protect the roots, feed naturally at the right time, keep the moisture steady, and watch your plants before small problems become large ones, you will be surprised how much stronger your tomatoes become. The fruit grows larger, the plants stay healthier, and the harvest continues much longer than you expected. The best part is that none of this depends on having a large garden or spending a lot of money. Even a few tomato plants can reward you with baskets of fresh fruit when they receive simple, consistent care. I still feel the same satisfaction every time I pick a large, ripe tomato that grew from methods passed down many years ago. It reminds me that gardening is not about rushing to the finish line. It is about doing a few ordinary things well and allowing nature to do the rest. If this season has not gone the way you hoped, do not be discouraged because every new season is another chance to grow healthier. Plants using what you have learned. Start with one improvement instead of trying to change everything at once. That is how lasting success is built in the garden. I hope these simple methods help you enjoy bigger, healthier, and more productive tomato plants, while spending less money and worrying less about every small problem. And before you leave, I want you to remember one thing. There is another forgotten natural habit that many experienced gardeners still use to keep tomatoes producing, almost until the end of the season. And once you discover that simple method, you may never look at your tomato plants the same way again.